You know that feeling when you're reading something and you just know there's more to it than the words on the page? Well, when you're talking about a sacred text like the Quran, that feeling is amplified like 1,000 times. Understanding it isn't just about reading words, it's this whole fascinating journey into the art and science of interpretation. So let's dive in and see how that actually works.
All right, here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to peel back the layers of this ancient practice. We'll start with why just reading the words isn't enough. Then we'll check out the toolkit scholars actually use. After that, we'll see how they find meaning for today's world, decode the text's hidden structure, and then jump into the ongoing debates. And finally, we'll ask the big question, why does any of this really matter?
So, first things first, why is a simple, direct reading just the starting line? Well, it's because a text like the Quran has all these different layers of meaning packed inside, and you can't get to them all just by skimming the surface.
I mean, that's the central question, isn't it? And if you think it's as simple as just read it, well, you're in for a surprise. The text itself shows us it's way more complex than that.
Okay, check this out. The word fasting is a perfect example. In one part of the Quran, it has a really broad linguistic meaning. It just means to stop doing something, to refrain. But in another part, that same exact word refers to a very specific functional act of worship, with all the detailed rules we associate with Ramadan. Same word, two totally different jobs to do. It all comes down to context.
And believe me, the analysis goes way deeper. We're not just talking about words here. Scholars will look at the rasm, the actual script and writing style, and even the dabt, the little punctuation marks that guide how you say the words. Literally every single detail is seen as a potential key to unlocking more meaning.
And that kind of detail brings us to the formal discipline of interpretation. See, scholars aren't just winging it. They're using a whole toolkit of sophisticated methods that have been developed and refined for centuries.
At the heart of this toolkit is a science called tafsir. That's the formal scholarly term for Quranic interpretation. You can think of it as the foundational operating system for moving from the written text to its deeper meaning.
So, one of the earliest and most important rules of tafsir is pretty genius. You let the Quran explain itself. Here's how it works. You find a verse that seems a bit unclear. Then you search the entire text for any other verses that talk about that same topic. You bring them all together and boom, you use the text itself as its own best dictionary.
But of course, it's not just about what's in the text. Context is absolutely everything. Scholars spend a ton of time studying the asbab an-nuzul, which literally means the reasons for revelation. It's kind of like trying to understand a friend's text message. If you don't know the conversation that happened right before, you could totally miss the point, right? That backstory is critical.
Okay, but all this super detailed work, it's not just some academic exercise. The whole point is to pull out real, practical guidance that we can use in our lives today.
And just look at the scope of topics we're talking about. Through interpretation, scholars are developing frameworks for everything from social justice and environmentalism to building emotional resilience, living a more minimalist life, and even fostering dialogue between different faiths. It's all about making that connection between a timeless text and very modern issues.
All right, now we're going to peel back another layer, because beyond just the big themes, interpretation involves this incredibly meticulous, almost surgical analysis of the Quran's language and its structure. So let's get a little nerdy for a second. Scholars look at the rhetoric, not just what is said, but how it's said. The sentence structure, the poetic style, it all matters. They study munasaba, which is how different verses and even whole chapters link together to create one big, cohesive message. And they even debate taraduf, this idea of whether any two words in the Quran can truly mean the exact same thing, or if every single word has its own unique fingerprint of meaning. The level of detail is just mind-blowing. Now, this is really important to get. This whole field of interpretation isn't some ancient, dusty thing where all the answers are locked in. Not at all. It's a living, breathing, and sometimes very passionate conversation that's been going on for centuries. And this idea from Sukiri Muliati really nails it. He basically says that meaning isn't just sitting there in the book waiting for you to find it. Instead, the person doing the interpreting, the mufassir, is an active participant. They, along with their tradition, are a huge part of creating that meaning.
For a perfect example of this in action, let's talk about leadership. Look at this. 3 different scholars, all looking at the same sources, and they come away with really different takes. Hamka has a list of 8 specific qualifications. Ibn Kathir's interpretation focuses on the faith of the leader. And then Jawad Mudniya applies the whole concept to the family, arguing that a husband's leadership isn't about being a dictator. Same topic, very different conclusion.
And it's not just the interpretations that change, the methods themselves are evolving. Classical scholars relied on tradition and established sets of rules. But today, modern interpreters are bringing in all sorts of new tools. We're talking software for numerical analysis, linguistic theories like semiotics, and new ways of understanding historical context. The toolkit is always getting bigger.
And get this whole conversation, this massive intellectual project, has been going on for over 1,400 years. Think about that. That's an incredible tradition of debate and discovery, stretching across continents and generations, all focused on understanding this one text.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. After looking at all this complexity and this long history, why does this deep and evolving quest for meaning really matter?
So, what have we really learned here? Well, first off, interpretation isn't just a nice extra. It's absolutely essential. We've seen that it's a super diverse and intellectually serious field. We know scholars use a whole complex toolkit of methods. And we know the end goal is always to build that bridge between a timeless text and our lives today, through a conversation that never stops evolving.
At the end of the day, interpretation isn't some barrier you have to get through to find the meaning. It is the process of making meaning. It's the essential, dynamic, and deeply human bridge that connects a sacred text to the constantly changing reality of our lives.
Which leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If interpretation is this human journey to grasp divine meaning, a process that's always changing and always debating, does that journey ever really have an end? Or is the quest itself the whole point?